Okay, what I want to do today is go through some things we talked about in class and redo them again, particularly the law of demand, and eventually we'll get into supply as well. But these are critical items, especially now that we've seen this gas crisis hit us. We're going to talk at the end of this chapter about this. But this is chapter 4. It's the continuation. Your quiz on Tuesday rather, will be on this chapter and chapter 3. So 3 and 4 will be the quiz on Tuesday. So this is what we went through in class. The price goes up, the quantity goes down, price goes down, quantity goes up. That is the law of demand. It's an inverse relationship between price and quantity, which means, again, as we just said, price goes down, quantity goes up. And it's based on several things. One of them is common sense. For instance, I use the example of a box of cookies. 50 cents more at the drugstore. I'm probably going to buy something other than chocolate chip cookies, maybe shift to sugar cookies. So we think at the margin. The margin is an increase in the price of cookies from $2 to $2.50. That 50 cents represents the marginal cost, the additional cost I'm going to have to pay to get those chocolate chip cookies. Now, what this also means and involves is what we call the law of diminishing marginal utility. The law of diminishing marginal utility relates to satisfaction. How much satisfaction do we get from the product? If I buy and eat a box of chocolate chip cookies, I'm satisfied. If I buy another box of chocolate chip cookies and start to eat it, I'm getting less satisfaction from that second box because I've already eaten the first box and I'm probably going to get sick to my stomach. There's an inverse relationship, so let's talk about that and why. First of all, income. Lower prices have the effect of raising our ability to buy something. So the lower the price, the better that we can buy it at, the more we'd be inclined to buy it. So cheaper, buy more. Substitution effect. I prefer chocolate chip cookies to sugar cookies, so chocolate chip cookies is what I want. But if the price goes up that 50 cents, I'm going to shift. I'm going to make a substitution because in my mind, chocolate chip cookies and sugar cookies are they're directly proportional to one another, and I can just as easily shift from one to the other. The same is true also with meat, for instance, steak and chicken. A lot of people, if the price of steak gets too high, will shift into purchasing chicken. Well, what's going to happen as a result of that is the price of chicken is going to go up and the price of steak is always going to come down. There is, therefore, in this whole process, based on what we buy and what we utilize, there's always a balance being taken into effect. So let's talk about graphs. I'm not going to ever ask you to do a graph on a test, but you should know how to do it. Now, the demand curve, as we said, has an inverse relationship. Price goes up, less is purchased. Price goes down, more is purchased. On the supply side, however, it's different. The price goes up, the producer will be encouraged to produce more and make more money. The price goes down, he's probably going to try to produce less. Now, the difference between the demand and supply curve that you have to remember is the demand curve always represents us, the consumer, and the supply curve, when we're talking about a commercial market now, and the supply curve always represents the producer, the one who's producing the product and selling it to us. Nonlinear curves, another curve we deal with, and that is called also a bell curve, and it depicts primarily a product's life cycle. Use the example in class of Apple. They started with the iPod, went to the iPhone, iPhone 4, 5, 6, 7, iPad, etc. All of these are introducing new products that keep the product alive and the company making a profit. Apple is a classic in how to develop products and stay in business. Okay, here's our demand curve. You look at it at $30, I'm only going to buy 5. At $25, I may buy 7, 7.5. At a little bit more than $15, I'll buy a little bit more than 10. At $15, I'll buy 15, 16 of them, and so on down the curve. So as we proceed down the curve, we're purchasing more and more units. Now, there are two types of extensions or issues with the demand curve. One is a movement along the demand curve, and this is the result of marginal utility. If, for instance, in our example here, if the price goes up from $3,000 to $4,000, we're going to buy less. Instead, we're going to buy, instead of 5, we're going to buy 4. If the price from 3,000 goes down to 2,000, instead of 5, we're going to buy 6. This is a movement along the demand curve, and it shows what happens given price changes. Now let's talk about a shift in demand. Shifts in demand can occur in the marketplace. For instance, in our example, at $4,000 on the standard demand curve that we've been using, we would produce or buy 5. However, if the demand curve shifts, for instance, because we've had a loss of income, demand curve, that means at $4,000 we can only buy 4. If we've had an increase in income and the demand curve shifts outward, at $4,000 we can buy 6. So be sure you understand the difference between a movement along the demand curve and a shift in demand. So what causes those shifts? Market demand can shift for a lot of different reasons. Taste and preferences. Just look at product evolution. A long time ago, we bought PCs, we bought towers. We're now into laptops, and that, of course, hurt PC sales. Then we moved into tablet sales. You know, we have what's called changing tastes and preferences. Now, in addition to that, numbers of buyers. The number of buyers can increase. How does that occur? Through immigration. A large quantity of people come into the United States and we have additional buyers. Lastly, income, which is probably the most important. This really determines what we're going to do in terms of our buying habits. For instance, if we're a little bit short of cash, we might ship at purchase or buy or go to Target rather than Nordstrom's or Saks Fifth Avenue. Market demand shifts continued. Prices of related goods impact us. For instance, if the dollar drops dramatically on the world market, the price of gold might increase, because what that tells investors worldwide is that the dollar and the U.S. economy may be in trouble, and therefore we should shift our income and our investments to hard assets like gold, silver, and things of that nature. Secondly, an increase in the price of beef may result in an increase in demand for chicken, as we talked about. Second example, coffee. We may be seeing an increase in coffee prices, which will have an increase in the demand for tea. Several years ago, we had big increases in coffee prices, and Starbucks raised the price of their coffee probably 10, 15 cents to cover that increase in prices of coffee. Now, coffee prices have since decreased. Has Starbucks reduced the price of their coffee? No. Okay, prices of complementary goods have an impact on sales. Right? A round of golf goes up, sales of golf clubs may decline. The price of golf goes up, people may not be playing as much, and therefore it may have a big impact on golf clubs, the sale of golf clubs. All right, this is an example occurred in the Wall Street Journal. I was teaching at a Harmony STEM school when this occurred, and we did this analysis in class. It was kind of interesting for the students to participate in. This is an article in the Wall Street Journal on the 10th of September in 2016, and it relates to the Apple problem with the Galaxy Note 7. They had a problem with batteries exploding, not only in people's pockets, but also on airplanes when they were being charged, etc. So what Samsung did is, because of the possibility of a fire in the lithium battery in their phones, they pulled the company completely off the market. They purged their inventory of all these batteries, and they totally stopped all new shipments until they could get their hands on the problem. Well, this has a demand and supply implication. As soon as that happened, and pretty much the day after or 2 days after, we speculated, well, what's going to happen to the price of stock? The Samsung stock is probably going to go down, and the Apple stock is going to go up. And by the way, that's exactly what happened. So we had a lot of fun with it in class. But that's a supply and demand issue. The supply for Samsung Note 7s totally dried up. So people shifted their purchases. If they had to have a phone, they shifted their purchases to the Apple phone away from the Samsung Galaxy 7. That's a shift in demand, not a movement along the curve. Now, time series graphs. I'm not going to ask you to do a graph in any of the tests, but you should know how to do it. So take a pencil and a piece of paper and graph this demand curve. You'll see the prices on the left from $1 to $10. Actually, that one should be a 0. And quantities from 0, from 1 through 2, 3, 4, 5. So try to graph that time series. So it's the demand curve, and it has an inverse relationship. You can see at a price of 10, we buy 0. At a price of 1, we'll buy 5. And consumers will buy more at lower prices. So plot that and understand it. One of the things I like to see students do, which helps them understand test questions, is to draw the graphs. Draw the diagram on the work paper that I give you for the quiz or the midterm or the final exam. It'll help you understand what goes on. That's a repeat. Okay, law of demand. Here's an enterprising young man on the other side of the border. We put up a 20-foot border wall, and people can no longer migrate or sneak into the United States because we've got a 20-foot wall. On the other side of the wall, there's an entrepreneur saying, Ralph's 20-foot ladder rentals, 21 foot, 1 foot higher than the wall. All right, let's talk about the law of supply now. The law of supply means that as price rises, producers will produce more. As price falls, producers will produce less. Now, if the price rises, they're going to produce more to increase their profits. If the price falls, they're going to produce less to reduce their costs and stay in business. We'll talk more about that. Now, the most prevalent example is agriculture. You plant the wheat from seeds. The farmer sees the price of wheat going down. He may substitute wheat for potatoes in his field. One of the things farmers do, and it's not easy to do the substitution necessarily, it all depends on where your farm is located, but what a lot of farmers do is they will sell contracts. Let's say they are going to produce 20,000 bushels of wheat. They will go to their combine or their broker and say, look, I'm going to deliver this wheat to you in the fall, probably harvest in September. I'll deliver the wheat to you in the fall, and this is the price I want, today's current price. The broker says, fine, I'm going to give you that price with a bit of a discount commission for me. So what he says that in 3 months, 4 months time, I'll buy your crop at the fixed price. Now, if the price goes up, the farmer is stuck with his contract and has to sell at that price. The price goes down, the broker is stuck with that contract and has to buy at that price. So they both take a risk. They're both hedging the prices of commodities. This is done a lot in the farming business, farming industry. Manufacturing, okay? Manufacturers tend to try to, if they see an increase in price, they're going to try to build more, make more. The problem may be is that a lot of their stuff, their costs, land, labor, capital is fixed. They've got as much in place as they can. And in the short run, they may not be able to respond to a higher price without a higher cost. For instance, let's say his factory is producing 100,000 units a year. The price of those units are, let's say, $2 or $3. The cost, rather, $2 or $3 cost. If he decides to produce 10,000 more, what's he going to have to do? Well, in order to increase his production, since he can't do much in the short run with machinery or land or capital, his only option is to increase his labor. So what he does is he adds another shift, he increases overtime, things of that nature. Now, the problem is he will suffer from the law of diminishing returns because he has to pay overtime. In Texas, 40 hours a week. Beyond 40 hours a week, you have to pay overtime, and overtime is 2.5 times the normal hourly rate. So the 100,000 units he produces will be cheaper per unit than the 1 unit beyond 100,000 units that he produces. In our case, 10,000 units are going to be more expensive to produce than the 100,000. Now, this is a short-run problem. Eventually, he can solve this problem by throwing capital at it or increasing his facilities. All right, let's look at an increase or decrease in supply. An increase in supply occurs when there's a movement along the curve. Producers produce more when prices go up. As we said, they respond to short-run increases by hiring more people, overtime, employing more equipment, etc. Producers produce less when the price goes down. Again, what do? Lay people off, create mandatory vacations, establish a shorter work week. So these two things that the producers do, again, we're talking about the producer side of it or the supply side. And here's the time series. All right, so you'll notice that it's a direct relationship. If the price is 10, the quantity is 5. If the price is 1, the quantity is 0. Price is 6, the quantity produced is 3. So this has a direct relationship. Producers will produce more at a higher price, which is the opposite of the demand curve where the consumer will buy more at a lower price. So these are the give and take between producers or suppliers and consumers, us. It's a give and take. It means we're working with price, quantity, supply, demand in the marketplace. Adam Smith's Invisible Hand. Okay, I duplicated that. All right, here's what the supply curve looks like. The supply curve is always upward sloping and to the right. The demand curve is always downward sloping and to the left. Okay. So you'll see here at a price of 5, the producer will produce 5 units. At a price of 6 or 7, 10 goes to 10. At a price of 10, he will produce 17. At a price of 15, he will produce about 23. So it's a movement along this curve, and that's the shape of the curve. It's always upward sloping and to the right. The demand curve is always downward sloping and to the right as well. All right, a shift in supply. Now, we're experiencing this today in our gasoline prices as a result of Hurricane Harvey. If you look at this graph, you'll see S, which is the red line. Now, a shift in supply inwards, as the graph shows you, causes the price to go up, okay, and the quantity to decline. Now, what we see is at a price of 3,000 units, if supply shifts, we produce or supply less from 5 to 4. If the supply goes up at that same price, we'll produce 6. And what we're going to talk about now is what's going to happen if, for instance, in a case of our shortage, what's going to happen to the shift in the supply curve? Well, it's obvious. The quantity purchased demanded is going to be exactly the same. So what will happen? The price goes up, and because of the shift in supply, the price is going to have to go up in order for the producer to continue to make a profit. And that's exactly what happened. The nominal price for gasoline probably is somewhere around $2.10. What I'm seeing now out there is about $2.49, but I've seen prices as high as $2.89 per gallon unleaded, and even higher than that in some cases. Some of the cases were higher. There were a lot of people gouging. All right, causes of supply shift. 1, resource prices. I'm in manufacturing and I have to buy things in order to make things. If I get a price increase or a price decrease in the products and the things that I buy to manufacture the product that you buy, I may have to raise or lower the price, probably raise it. Technology has a big impact. Now, technology is a good thing. You have to keep abreast of technology. And if you're in business, you have to continue to look at what is the impact of technology on my business. Can I reduce my cost? Remember, the lowest cost producer is the one who wins. Taxes and subsidies. What governments charge in taxes and whether they subsidize products has a big impact on what I can price my product at. Later on in the course, I'm going to show you a schedule that compares tax rates for the US and other countries around the world. Our corporate tax rate is the highest in the world. If you look at the NAFTA treaty, the tax rates for corporations for Mexico and for Canada are a lot lower than ours. And they are therefore able to reduce prices in addition to possibly lower wage rates, particularly in Mexico. All right, prices of other goods impact, right? We get a shift in prices. Again, if the chocolate chip cookie, sugar cookie example, if sugar cookies were to, for instance, drop their prices 50 cents, I might be inclined to move into the sugar cookie area because it's costing me less money and I have more income to spend on other things. Producer expectations. What do I think is going to happen? This is a case where, you know what, I think we can sell 10,000 more units. Okay, let's take a risk. Let's try to produce more, even though they're going to cost more, and let's sell more units and make more profit. Number of sellers. This is important. We're going to talk about number of sellers is important, and just as much as number of buyers is important in the marketplace. The more sellers, the more competitive the prices. The less sellers, the less competitive the price. We talk about monopoly and oligopoly. A monopolist owns the demand curve. He can price it at anything he wants. So a monopolist owns the demand curve. All right, changes in the quantity supplied affect prices. Shortages, like we're experiencing now with gasoline. Okay. A shift in demand and supply. Let's look at what happens when both shift. Here we see the demand curve, demand 1, and the original supply curve, supply 1. And our price and quantity at that is P1 and Q1. If, for instance, the demand curve increases or shifts outward, and we have an increase in demand for a product, and therefore the supplier has to meet that product or that shift, you'll see a price increase and the amount of quantity being sold increase as well. So the price will decrease. The price will decrease from P1 to P2. The quantity supplied will increase from Q1 to Q2. Again, we're going to buy more at lower prices, but we also have had an increase, let's say, in income, so we can buy more. And therefore, the consumer or the producer is going to react to that and produce more units for us to buy because he makes more profit. All right, example of commodity oversupply. The Wall Street Journal had an article in 2014. Sugar inventories grew like crazy at one time. The production of sugar fell 3% as inventories continued to increase. Now, sugar has had a problem in the sense that there are a lot of substitutes now out on the market for artificial sweeteners. So in this example or this article, sugar prices sank more than 3% to a 7-month low for the 4th consecutive year. It's called the extra sweetener impact. Excuse me. So what did the producers do? Analysts and traders anticipated an end of supply Brazil was in trouble, low sugar prices. So what do? They reduced the amount of sugar they put into crops. They scaled back their investments in cane sugar, and they shut some sugar mills altogether. So their idea here is that if we're going to affect the prices, we have to reduce the quantity we're producing. This is the same philosophy that OPEC uses in trying to control the price of oil. OPEC is currently trying to get the price of oil higher by restricting output. All right, let's take them two together. Demand and supply, what happens? What does it look like? Equilibrium is where the demand and supply curves intersect. That is the price at which we, the consumer, are satisfied, and that is the quantity at which they, the producer, is satisfied. It's also known as market clearing, which means that everything that's produced is sold. There's no inventories. There's no shortages. It's market clearing. Everything that's produced is sold in the marketplace at that price. So no shortages, no surpluses, no shortages of surpluses for consumers and producers to grapple with. Equilibrium of supply and demand. This is what it looks like. In this case, it's always the intersection of the demand and the supply curve. That is the price at which we are happy, and it's the quantity at which the supplier or the producer is happy, and it's called equilibrium. Now, one of the things that's not on this chart is that you should understand that the marginal benefit on the demand curve equals the marginal cost on the supply curve. So marginal benefit and marginal cost are equal at equilibrium. All right, governments. Sometimes the governments get involved in price controls, subsidies, rent control, and as a result, they may involve or create black markets. So some unintended consequences result in more problems. I gave you the example of the young man who was selling contraband cigarettes in Manhattan because the tax on prices were so high, and the disastrous results from that. Those are unintended consequences. Now the government has to or decides to set a price for, let's say, rent. And if they set that price too low, let's say that apartment in New York or Manhattan is, in Brooklyn rather, is renting for 2 bedrooms for, well, let's say $1,200. The government comes in and says, you know what, we want poor people to be able to access this, so we're going to force you to charge only $1,000 a month rent. Now, what that has is the problem of if you're the developer or the person managing that apartment building, what'll happen is you're not going to buy anymore if the government, you're not going to build anymore, rather, if the government comes in and tells you what you can rent them for. The other thing that happens is if you are maintaining the property, you're not getting enough money to maintain it properly, and they fall into disarray or into all kinds of things happen in these projects. Not good. But then again, it's government involvement. It's also impossible for the government to establish a long-term price even close to equilibrium. The price is too high, black markets. Price is too low, shortages. Too low, people won't produce it. Too high, they'll find ways to get product in cheaper through the black market. So it's virtually impossible for the government to do this thing right. It's extremely difficult because the government has no invisible hand like we do. The market forces, supply and demand, are not left to their own devices. Let me give you a little story about a company I work for where the CEO ignored supply and demand issues. We produced a product for telephone companies that increased the capacity of a single pair of copper wire into a home. The copper wire into a home at one point in time was a single wire with one phone. We produced a product that enabled, we switched it from analog to digital. We put a digital unit on the end of that copper wire, and we were able to get 4 phones out of 2 pair. Great product. We had a great run. The telephone companies merged. with AT&T breakup in 1987, AT&T ended up creating 7 sisters, New York Tel, Pacific Tel, etc. Well, that lasted for a while, and then the phone companies started to merge again. It became Verizon. Pacific Bell was bought by Verizon, and there are basically 3 companies that are left, and AT&T, of course, is one of them. But when they merged, we were selling to these guys, and the purchasing managers turned to us and said, look, we're now 2 companies. We're going to buy twice as much. We want you to drop your price to half of what it was before. That's what they want. Our CEO said, no, we're not going to do that because we need to keep higher margins so that we can work on technology to produce better products for you guys. So we're going to charge you more so that you can benefit from that in the future. Trust us. Purchasing managers said, no way. We lost our business to another competitor. And because we would not agree to a new lower price, it wouldn't negotiate a lower price. Crazy stuff. The company was sold a few years later, and that CEO is no longer in that job. Okay, that ends chapter 4. We'll go into chapter 5 on Tuesday when we meet. We'll also, your quiz on Tuesday will cover chapters 3 and 4. So study your book, go through what we've gone through in class and this video, and that should put you in good stead for the quiz on Tuesday. It'll probably be, again, 15 questions. About a third of them be multiple choice. The rest will be true, false. So I'll see you on Tuesday.